morning.
Morning.
Gemar Chasima Tova to everyone. I'm going to take a look today, tomorrow, and Thursday at different subjects about the Aseres Yemei Teshuva, Yom Kippur, Bo'aleinu L'Tova. We begin with the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Daf Tes Zayin Amud Beis. It's not in your handouts. The handout for today is a Pachad Yitzchak that quotes the Gemara, but I'm going to read directly from the Gemara. It's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah on Daf Tes Zayin. It's a Gemara that we became familiar with when we were very young. Our teachers, our Rebbeim, our Morot, told us that on Rosh Hashanah there are 3 books that are open, and some of us made pictures to bring home for our parents of 3 books. This comes from the Gemara on Rosh Hashanah Daf Tes Zayin Amud Beis. Amar Reb Kuspadoi, Amar Reb Yochanan, Shloisha Sforim Niftachim b'Rosh Hashanah. There are 3 books that get opened on Rosh Hashanah. Echad Shel Rishoyim Gemurim. One is a book in which is inscribed Rishoyim Gemurim, complete, absolute evil people. Rishoyim Gemurim. Ve'echad Shel Tzadikim Gemurim. And one book is a book in which are inscribed the Tzadikim Gemurim, the absolute, complete Tzadik. Ve'echad Shel Beinanim. And then there's a book for the Beinanim, for the people in the middle. Now, of course, the Gemara here is, as we talked, we learned the Das Tavunos, we learned the Rambam Yesodei HaTorah, Perek Aleph, Dibra Torah Koloshim B'nei Adam. The Torah, and including Chazal, sometimes want to convey to us a message, and they can only convey to us the message in human talk. So the idea is that there are 3 dinim going on, 3 kinds of judgments. But the idea that there's a bookcase in heaven, there are actually 3 books, and God opens up the books and closes the books, this physicality is not true. We're not talking about physical books and God physically writing in books. We've discussed that in the Das Tavunos, we've discussed that in the Rambam Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah Perek Aleph. But Dibra Torah Koloshim B'nei Adam, in order for us to understand what's happening on Rosh Hashanah, we say there are 3 books, meaning there are 3 judgments, there are 3 categories. The Sforim ask, and I once heard the Boston Rebbe, Zechron Tzadik Lebracha, the Boston Rebbe of Beit Shemesh, address this. In the Avinu Malkeinu that we say in Aseres Yemei Teshuva, we say Avinu Malkeinu Kasveinu B'Sefer Chaim Tovim, Avinu Malkeinu Kasveinu B'Sefer Gula V'Yeshua. And we go through a lot of sefers. So here the Gemara says that there are 3 Shlosha Seforim Niftachim. There are 3 books that are open on Rosh Hashanah. And yet, beginning Rosh Hashanah and through Aseres Yemei Teshuva, we talk about a lot of books. So it could be that there are only 3 books and there are sub-chapters in the books, but we talk in Avinu Malkeinu about a lot of books. Kasveinu B'Sefer Gula Yeshua, Kasveinu B'Sefer Panosa V'Chalkola. But this idea of books should not be taken in a physical sense. These are ideas of the din, of the judgment that's going on. So the Gemara says that there are 3 books: Tzadikim Gemurim, Rishoyim Gemurim, and Beinonim. Tzadikim Gemurim nechtam l'alta l'chayim. Tzadikim Gemurim, these complete tzadikim, are signed, sealed immediately on Rosh Hashanah for chayim, for life. Rishoyim Gemurim nechtam l'alta l'misa. The complete, absolute Rishoyim are written and inscribed immediately for loyaleinu, death. Beinonim, the people in the middle, tuluyim v'omdim, they're hanging and standing. Their judgment's not complete on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah v'ad Yom Kippurim, they're standing, they're hanging and standing from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. Zachu, if by the time Yom Kippur comes, they have merited life, nechtavim l'chayim. they will be sealed, signed, and sealed for life. Lo yizachu, if chas v'sholom they did not merit during the Aseres Yemei Teshuva through Yom Kippur, nechtavim l'misa. They are, the Gemara uses the word nechtavim, and we always talk about the chasima. It's not just written, but sealed. We're not going to go into that. Our Kabbalah is, and that's how we daven Yom Kippur, is the chasima. So what do we have? We have the tzaddikim gamurim Adonan Rosh Hashanah, the Rishayim gamurim Adonan Rosh Hashanah, and the Beinanim are working Aseres Yemei Teshuva to be inscribed for life. What do you have to do to be inscribed in life? The Gemara says a very simple word, zachu. If between the Aseres Yemei Teshuva through Yom Kippur you end up in a state of zachu, so if we think about this as, again, the childhood thought, 3 books, and you have the scales. A tzaddik is a person whose scales tipped to the mitzvah side. A rasha is a person whose scales tip to the evil side. And a beinoni is a person whose scales are perfectly equal. So now, if between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the beinoni is able to add to his mitzvah side, so it tips the Aveira side, he has a year of life. If the Aseres Yemei Teshuva, he can't tip the scales to the mitzvah side, le'aleinu, something else. That's our picture from our younger years of the 3 books and the 2 sides of the scale. There's a big machlokes rishonim. What does this, when it says tzaddikim, what does tzaddikim mean? When it says rishoyim, what does rishoyim mean? And the common understanding is the understanding we get from Tosfos. Tosfos comments, since the Gemara counts tzaddikim gemurim, rishoyim gemurim, and beinanim, what does beinanim mean? Somebody in the middle. What's he in the middle? Tosfos says, mashma de tzaddikim kari lemisha zuchuyoisa merubim, rishoyim gemur lemisha v'noisa merubim. Tosfos says that since the Gemara talks about a person in the middle, he's in the middle. What does it mean in the middle? It must mean that his scales are exactly equal. Therefore, a tzaddik doesn't mean a tzaddik who's a perfect person. It means a tzaddik who's tipped the scales in favor of mitzvah. And what does a rasha mean? He's tipped the scales on the side of rasha. And a beinoni, we now understand, he hasn't tipped the scales to either way. That's what Tosfos says. So from there we get this picture of 3 books, 2 scales, and tzaddik pushed the scale down to mitzvahs, rasha pushed the scale to averos, and a beinoni is perfectly in the middle, and both scales are equal, and he has until Yom Kippur to zachu. The Gemara says the beinoni, which is what we're working on, Aseres Yemei Teshuva, we're working on the beinoni scale. If it's zachu, if you can tip the scale to the side of tzaddik, what does that mean? That during the Aseres Yemei Teshuva, through Yom Kippur, you do some mitzvahs, you stop doing certain things that you shouldn't be doing, so that you can tip the scales. So when Yom Kippur comes, you've tipped the scale ever so slightly to the mitzvah side. Now you have a year of life. If lo yizachu, the Gemara says, you didn't merit, and you couldn't tip the scale to the mitzvah side, something else happens. This is our understanding from when we were in elementary school, the 3 books and the scales. And this comes from Tosfos, although Tosfos was oversimplified for us because of our young age. And then we grew up with this concept, and as I've said many times, Girsa de Yanakusa, the Gemara calls it in Shabbos, what you learn when you're young, it leaves a certain impression on us, and it's hard to steig, to grow in our ideas that are implanted on us about these simple matters. And we continue through our adult life, working through Rosh Hashanah, Aseres Yemei Teshuva, and Yom Kippur, that there are the three books and their scales, and we're pushing the scales, and every time we do mitzvah, we have this idea in our mind. I gave tzedakah during Aseres Yemei Teshuva. I put some more weight on the mitzvah side. I did something I shouldn't do. I put some more weight on the avera side. I keep on going back and forth during Aseres Yemei Teshuva. And we're going to take a look at the Pachad Yitzchak now, Miyat Hashem, how this is very, very immature way of looking at the Gemara and understanding the Gemara. Because there's no way to know who you are, when you are, at what point. So if you're an Aseres Yemei Teshuva today, and your person's a Beinani, so he davened in the morning, he tipped the scales to Tzaddik. He did something in the afternoon, he tipped the scales to Russia, now he's a Russia. And then at Mincha time, he gave more tzedakah and he learned Torah, and now the scales are really tipped, he's a Tzaddik. And then later in the afternoon, he gets angry, he gets into a fight with someone, or he doesn't do something, or he does something, and all of a sudden he's back in Russia. And this is going on for 10 days, back and forth and back and forth. Tzaddik Russia, Tzaddik Russia, Tzaddik Russia, Tzaddik Russia. And what happens? Eventually Yom Kippur is going to come. And what happens? By Kol Nidre, he's crying and he's davening with Kavana, and he donates a lot of money to yeshiva, and all of a sudden he's a tzaddik. But then he has to go to sleep, and he wakes up the next morning in Kippur, and he doesn't daven, so ay. So now the scale gets tipped a little the other way to Russia. And now on Yom Kippur itself, before Shachris, he was a tzaddik. After Shachris, he's a Russia. Then during Musaf, he's a tzaddik. During the break between Musaf and Mincha, he got into a shmooze with someone outside the shul. They didn't talk about the nicest things in the world. He's again a Russia. And then he davens Mincha nicely, and he buys Mafta Yoina, and now he's a tzaddik. So now, even on Yom Kippur, he's a tzaddik, he's a Russia, he's a tzaddik, he's a Russia. The scales are going up, the scales are going down, the scales are going. At what point on Yom Kippur does the Rebbeinu Shalom say, stop? And at that point, it's like musical chairs, stop. And someone's missing a chair and he's out of the game. At what point, if you learn the Gemara and have this understanding, at what point in Yom Kippur does the Rebbeinu Shalom say, stop the carousel? Oh, for you, the carousel stopped, you were tzaddik. Unfortunately for you, when the carousel stopped, you were Russia. Maybe if I gave you another couple of minutes, the carousel would move a little more and you'd be tzaddik. But this is where we stop. We stop a minute before Ne'ilah, we stop in the middle of Ne'ilah, we stop after Ne'ilah. Whatever the moment is, there's some moment where, boom, the scale stops. It's a very immature way to look at the Gemara and to understand the scales and to understand the three books. Rav Hutner is going to introduce us to a whole new understanding of the Gemara, and he's going to introduce us to this understanding of the Gemara based upon the Rambam in Hilchos Teshuva, how the Rambam writes over this Gemara. We learned this Rambam. You may have the handout with you. We sent it out before Rosh Hashanah. It's Perek Gimel of Hilchos Teshuva, Halacha Gimel. The Rambam there says, Kishem sheshoklin zechuyis adam v'avoinosav v'shas misasai. The same way that the Rebbeinu Shalom weighs, the same way the Rebbeinu Shalom weighs a person's merits and a person's sins when he dies. Kach b'chol shana v'leinu, kach b'chol shana v'shana, sheiklin avoina is kolechad ve'echa miboy ha'olam im zuchiyoisa b'yonta shel Rosh Hashanah. The same way that this weighing process occurs at death, le'aleinu, the same weighing process occurs every year for every human being, where God weighs a person's merits and a person's averos on Rosh Hashanah. Mishanim tzaddik, a person who on Rosh Hashanah is found to be a tzaddik. The Rambam doesn't put in gomor, complete. The Gemara's word was tzaddikim gemurim. The Rambam doesn't have the word gomor. Mishanim tzaddik, a person who God finds to be a tzaddik, nechtam l'chaim, he's sealed for life. Mishanim tzaroshin, somebody that's found to be a Russia, nechtam l'misa, he's sealed for something else. Again, Russia, the Rambam uses Russia, doesn't say Russia gum. V'habeinani, the person in the middle, who we said the scales are perfectly equal, not tzaddik, not Russia. Toilen loy ad yom kippurim, He hangs until Yom Kippur. No decision is made. Im asa tshuva, nechtam l'chaim. If he does tshuva, he's going to be sealed for life. If chas v'shalom he doesn't do tshuva, nechtam l'misa, will be sealed for something else. The Rambam switched the words, critical words here from the Gemara. The Rambam said the Beinani, the person that's in the middle. If, the Gemara says, Zachu, if he merits, he's going to be inscribed for life. Loi Zachu, he doesn't merit, he'll be inscribed for something else. The words the Gemara used was Zachu, he merited, or Loi Zachu, he didn't merit. Which means, based upon our elementary school concept, you're constantly throwing merits on the side of the merit scale, on the side of the scale of merits, and you're throwing Le'aleinu Averis on the Averis scale, side of the scale. And the scale's moving up and down. And the Gemara says, Zachu, if you end up at a point where your zechuyot, your merits are more and outweigh your Averis, life. If chas v'shalom you end up at a point where the Averis outweigh the merits, something else. That's the reading of the Gemara. Those are the words of the Gemara. Zachu, lo zachu. The merits increased, or lo zachu, the merits didn't increase. The Rambam changes the words. Zachu, merit, became asu tshuva. He did tshuva. Lo zachu, he didn't merit. The Rambam changes to didn't do tshuva. So this is a whole new idea. This is not the idea that seems to be formulated in the Gemara. The Gemara doesn't talk about tshuva. The Gemara says your scales are even. They're beinani. Throw some mitzvahs on the scale. Staka, gemilas chasadim, more kavanim davening. Now the scale outweighs the averis, life. The Rambam doesn't say that. The Rambam is not talking about throwing more zechuyot on the merit scale. The Rambam says in order to merit life, it's not making sure that the zechuyot outweigh the averis. The Rambam says you have to do tshuva. Doesn't make a difference how many mitzvahs you do. It doesn't make a difference. Now, it could be, of course, the mitzvahs could be part of doing tshuva. But we all know a person can do a lot of mitzvahs and not do tshuva. A person has certain things that he does, whatever it is, lashon hara, rechilas, motzi shemra, whatever he does, and he continues doing it. It's just that during Aseres Yemei tshuva, he gives extra tzedakah. He gets up earlier in the morning to say slichas. But he hasn't changed the things he needs to change. A person can continue doing that, and he just does more mitzvahs. So according to the Gemara's formulation, if a person keeps on doing what he was doing, but does a tremendous amount of mitzvahs, and he's zahu, and the scales of the mitzvahs now outweigh the scale of the averis, according to the literal reading of the Gemara, he's okay, he should be inscribed for life. The Rambam changes the formulation. The Rambam says no matter how many mitzvahs you're going to do, and no matter how much you tip the scale that the mitzvahs outweigh the averis, you have to do tshuva. Im asa tshuva, if you did tshuva, he doesn't say zachu, if you merit, and the merits now outweigh the averis, he says zachu. He says masa tshuva, if you did tshuva. So it depends on tshuva. So let's take a look at the Pachad Yitzchak. It's Pachad Yitzchak Yitches of the Maiman Rosh of Pachad Yitzchak and Rosh Hashanah. And first he quotes the Gemara. Shlosha Svarim Neftachim V'Gomer. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says that there are 3 books that are open in Rosh Hashanah. Tzadikim Gemurim Nechtonim La'alta L'chaim, Mishorim Gemurim La'alta L'misa, Veinanim Tluya V'oinim Ad Yom HaKippurim. Zachu Nechtonim L'chaim, Lo Zachu Nechtonim L'misa. This is the language of the Gemara. The Beinanim have scales that are perfectly equal. If you add enough merit to tip the scales to the merit side, life. You don't tip the scales to the merit side, le'aleinu something else. That's the Gemara. Rambam, Shehetik Braisasu, the Rambam, when he was quoting this brisa in Hilchos Teshuva, Shina Lashon Gemara, he changed the words of the Gemara. The besugin, because in the Gemara, haloshin hu zachu nektom l'chai. The Gemara carefully used the word zachu, merits. For Rambam Shina haloshin v'heptek im asu tshuva nektom l'chayim. V'mokoim zuchus bechlal higbil es ha'inyin l'tshuva dafka. The Rambam has changed the formulation. Instead of the broad concept, just have more merits than Aseres, which is what the Gemara says, Zahu. The Rambam, when he formulates and explains the Gemara, he uses the word Teshuva. You must do Teshuva. You can add as many Zahuyas as you want to the merit side. You cannot get inscribed in the book of life until Teshuva is done. You must do Teshuva. So if you think about what the Rambam is saying, the Rambam is saying, whereas the Gemara says, keep on putting a lot of merit on the merit side so that the merits become so heavy it outweighs the Aseres, you can be inscribed for life. The Rambam says, do whatever you want on the merit side, that's Gavaldik, but you have to do Teshuva from what's on the Aseres side. You cannot just focus. If you read the Gemara literally, so I have my Aseres side, I have my mitzvah side, and I keep on adding mitzvahs and mitzvahs and mitzvahs, and I tip the scale to mitzvahs. The Rambam says it's very nice that you're putting a lot of mitzvahs on your mitzvah scale, and you tip the scale to mitzvah, but in order to be inscribed in the book of life, you have to do something about the Aseres scale. You have to do tshuv. So the Rambam is now reformulating the Gemara, and he's explaining the Gemara as he would understand it. Now, where did he get this understanding from? So our footnote says, Umar Hagoy Moreinu Reb Yitzchak Blaza mi Peterburg, Reb Yitzchak Blaza mi Peterburg, Reb Itzela we call him in Yeshiva, Reb Itzela Peterburger. Reb Itzel Peterburger was a Talmud Muvik of Reb Yisrael Salanta, and in fact, a lot of what we have from Reb Yisrael Salanta comes from through Reb Yitzchak Blaza. So Reb Yitzchak Blaza asked this kasha, Hirgish Bakan Tmir Rabas. Rabbi Yitzchak Blaza had asked this question on the Rambam. What's a Beinani? He's in the middle. The scales are not tipped either way, not to the good, not to the bad. V'im kain, if that's the case, if you read the Gemara literally, according to the literal formulation of the Gemara, a Beinani is someone whose the two sides of the scale are equal. If he puts a couple of mitzvahs on the mitzvah side, and when Yom Kippur comes, the mitzvah side outweighs the Aseres side, he's zeicher to achsim gemach sim b'tayvel l'chaim d'am l'sholom. That's what the Gemara says. The Rambam seems to change this. Rabbi Yitzchak Blaza asks, where do Rambam get this from? So the Rafutna now is going to explain what we mentioned earlier, that this whole idea of 3 books and 2 sides of a scale that we got in elementary school, we need to now steig and advance in our understanding. Amnum Tamiyazu Tamtsi Lanu Mokar Moitzi Yafel Abira Mabit Shabibus Ruiz Ribraves Baflal. Because of Rabbi Yitzchak Blaza's kasha, we're going to have to rethink this whole idea of 3 books and the 2 sides of a scale. We understand, as we mentioned at the beginning of Shir, Dibra Torah Koloshim Meyadim and Chazal also want to convey to us ideas, but they don't literally mean that there's books and there's scales, and the Rebbeinu Shalom is taking people's mitzvahs and averes and putting it on physical scales. He's taking books off the shelf and he's inscribing people in ink. These are concepts. But now with Rabbi Yitzchak Blaza's kasha, we now know that we need to re-examine these concepts and reformulate them based upon how the Rambam wrote his version of the Gemara. Shigvus hamachshava teifes samusag ribus achuyes v'samusag ribu avonis kamusag kamusi. Kamusi means quantity. The regular common thought is that when we say a person has the ribui mitzvahs, he has more mitzvahs, then he's a tzaddik. Ribui averis, he's a rasha. We think about quantity. Kloima afal pisha bavada ein amisper hagorm habalod l'shikol zeh shaluba yischoyis alahepach mikol mokem ein ledale kan alabchina hakamusis. The bavada yesh letoiva achas hamabedes kamarois v'chein lahepach. Ukmoikei afilu mishkola shaloisa toiva shal oisera mischalaf misha achas lechaverta. Ukmoisha kosar Ramam the shikol zeh hu mishkola shal kel deas. There's no question that the Rambam already told us that this is not one mitzvah, one avera, one mitzvah, one avera, one mitzvah, one avera. We learned before Rosh Hashanah that nobody can make this judgment except God, because there can be one mitzvah that a person does that in order to do the mitzvah, he does it with great mesivus nefesh, with great difficulty. And that mitzvah can go on the mitzvah side of the scale and outweigh 1,000 averas. On the other hand, it can be an avera that a person does that because of the circumstances and the severity of the avera, it outweighs 1,000 mitzvahs. So we're not dealing only with numbers, we're dealing with numbers and the circumstances that go around each mitzvah and each avera. But nevertheless, we're still in an area of quantity where quality is also considered, but we're dealing with quantity. There are 100 mitzvahs, grade A. There are 150 mitzvahs, grade B+, etc. And that is compared to the averas, but we're still dealing in numbers. Al b'chol zayis, Rav Hutner says, nihita mishkal haschuyas v'achoyvus hu mishkal ikusi. Even though the actual weighing is an ikusi, it is quality. One mitzvah can be worth 1,000 averas, and one aver can be worth 1,000 mitzvahs. So there is a quality issue. Mikol mokem hachefza shel hamishkal hazeh, da'inu hadvorim shemishkal zeh goyrim hem schum shel kamiyas mitzvahs averas. Nevertheless, even in the quality, we need to know the quantity. This person has one mitzvah that's worth 1,000 averas. He has another mitzvah that's worth 200 averas. He has another mitzvah that's worth 50 averas. He has a mitzvah that's worth one avera. We still have to know, the Rebbeinu Shalom is still going to count the number of mitzvahs and then give a quality ranking to each mitzvah. So we're still in that thought process of how many mitzvahs, how many averas, and of what quality, of what grade will we give them. Kazuhi tfisasa shel shivas hamachshava musagim halolu shel rubei mitzvahs v'ribi averas. And this is how we go on from elementary school, and we envision these scales and these 3 books. Ram, however, la'acha hamokas machreshes hamachshav b'pnimiyusam shel musagim rubei zechuyas b'chayves yischadesh etzleinu hamabit b'avchanosam shel musagim halolu. Hamabed hachodesh ma'alonu ki rubo zechuyas ein shchum shel kama zechuyas yechidas, riba averes ein shchum shel kama averes yechidas. The in beschum askinan kios hay madregas u beschuyas mishtanes mishor l'shor u'meirega l'rega. Rav Hutner says this is not possible to understand the Gemara this way, and the Rambam understood that you can't read the Gemara this way, because that means every second, Reuven, he's a Rasha. He just turned into a tzaddik. An hour later, Nebuch, he turned into a Rasha again. He's a tzaddik again. During the day, a person goes from Rasha, tzaddik, Beinani. Tzaddik, Rasha, Beinani, 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 tzaddik, Rasha. Beinani, tzaddik, Rasha, 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 Beinani, tzaddik. You can't have such a matziv. It's not possible that a person's constantly going from tzaddik to Rasha and tzaddik to Rasha in between Beinani. You have a person who's a tzaddik, and suddenly he's nichshol in an avei, he became a rasha. This idea that a person goes rasha, tzaddik, tzaddik, rasha, beini, is simply not logical, that's how the Rebbeinu Shalom is running and judging the world. Daloi kol avei v'chol mitzvah hamizdam l'sloi alulus heim l'shanis es tarui es ta'orei haklol. Omnam masha mabet hachodesh maru lanu hu kiru boi zechuyis hu kav ba'opio shel odom. The new explanation that we're going to give to Tzaddik and Rasha is not going to be about the momentary look at a person. This moment, the scale is tipped this way as a Tzaddik. Unfortunately, 2 minutes later, he became a Rasha. We're leaving that. Tzaddik and Rasha is a style. It's a type of person. It's a lifestyle. A person lives the lifestyle of a tzaddik. A person can live the lifestyle of a rasha, and a person can live the lifestyle of a beinani. Whenever I learn this Parchat Yitzchak with a group, so before we go further, I give a marshal. Rav Hutner didn't give this marshal; he's going to give a different marshal. I'll give a marshal here. I don't know if they still do it today in America. When I was in the States, banks were more personal than I guess they are today. But a long time ago, people walked into a bank and you knew a specific teller, or you knew a specific person that had a desk in the bank. And sometimes you needed, somebody gave you a check and you needed the check to clear that day. It was an out-of-state check. It takes 3 days, 7 days. So your teller, or you went over to the person at the table and he gave a little call to the teller and he said, clear the check today. So there was a way that we had relationships with particular tellers and particular people in the bank, and they were willing to go out of their way for us. And sometimes where we would get a call, I know I did sometimes, you get a call in the morning and you thought that a check had cleared and it didn't clear yet. And the person you knew in the bank called you early in the morning, 8:30, and said, Mr. Lubling, your account is $150 overdrawn. How can it be $150 overdrawn? I made a deposit. Say, well, that check, we haven't cleared it yet. And so your account is overdrawn. I say, can you clear the check? Well, we can't clear this particular check. It's from Wisconsin. It's going to take at least to the end of the day to clear the check. Is it possible for you to make a deposit? I say, yeah, I'll make a deposit. When can you make the deposit, Mr. Lubling? Can I come in at 2 o'clock? Sure, come in 2 o'clock. In the meantime, we'll let your check clear. We won't bounce the check. And the reason they did this for people is a person that had an account where basically the account showed that checks were covered. So really, if ever a check was overdrawn or bounced, a person, quote unquote, became a good credit risk. A person, the bank trusted the person. He has a history with the bank where the checking account looks good, deposits are made, and there's a flow in there and checks are not bouncing. Something happened here. Let's say, sure, come in at 2 o'clock. And they're willing to let you, they're willing to cover the check for you, even though there's not sufficient funds in the account to cover it. But they say, okay, come in a couple of hours, we'll take care of it. In the meantime, it's okay. There are people, however, who have a history where checks bounce. They come in the next day, they come in 2 days, the bank's constantly calling them, the bank's constantly charging them for bounced checks. And they don't do those kind of things for those people. They don't go out of their way for those people. They're not going to say to them, we're going to let the check pass through, come in at 2 o'clock and cover it, because of the history. Similarly, a person can have a history with the Rebbeinu Shalom, where a person's life is just a good credit. He has a wonderful credit history. For the vast majority of his life, this person was on the right side. He was on the side of Zechuyot. And the Rebbeinu Shalom sees that this is a person who has a good credit history. He's been on the right side. His Zechuyot are more than his Averis for the good portion of his life. And Nebuch, today he was Nichshal, and he tipped the scale to go to the Averis side, and now he is on the Averis side of the scale. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, you know what, we're going to give him an extended credit. We're going to give him some overdraft. He's always been living a lifestyle of a tzaddik. Right now, something's off, and he's in overdraft, meaning the Averas have overtaken the mitzvah, so he's in Avera overdraft. You know what? We're going to give him some overdraft protection. And we're going to wait till he does Teshuva, because I know his lifestyle. He's always been on the right side. He's always been on the mitzvah side. So he remains a tzaddik, which means that he doesn't become a rasha because he tipped the scale of Avera on a given minute or on a given day. The Rebbeinu Shalom says we're looking at the person's bigger picture, his life. And he is a tzaddik. He happens to be in overdraft right now. He's still a tzaddik. I know who he is. He's still a tzaddik. We're going to give him overdraft protection, and we're going to wait a day, a week, a month. The Rebbeinu Shalom knows. And we're going to wait to see if he can get back into the positive, the mitzvah side of the scale. A rasha is a person just the opposite. A rasha who has lived his life where he's always been tipping the scales to the Avera side. And it happens to be on 1 day or 2 days or 3 days, he did a tremendously big mitzvah. So what happened for those 2 or 3 days? He now tipped the scale to the tzaddik side. He doesn't become a tzaddik for those 2 or 3 days. He remains a rasha. He remains in overdraft because the Rebbeinu Shalom knows that given 2, 3 days or a week, he's going to go right back into his Avera side scale. So the Rebbeinu Shalom is not changing people every single moment. The Rebbeinu Shalom knows that a person is, his lifestyle is tzaddik. If he goes into overdraft, the Rebbeinu Shalom will give him overdraft protection. A person on the other hand can be a rasha, and for a couple of days he can go into more Averas than more mitzvahs than Averas. The Rebbeinu Shalom says he's still a rasha because I know what his lifestyle is, and it's just a question of time before he tips the scales again. What's a Beinani? So we'll find out in a moment what a Beinani is. A Beinani is also a lifestyle. So let's see what Rav Hutner now tells us about this tzaddik and this rasha. They are not changing every second. When the Gemara talks about tzaddik, it means the lifestyle of a tzaddik, the historical lifestyle of a tzaddik. A rasha, it's the historical lifestyle of a rasha. So we're back into the Pachad Yitzchak. 9 lines on the bottom. Omna masha hamabet hachodesh marulonu ki hu ruboy zechiyas hu kav ba'opio shel adam. When the Gemara talks about a person that's in a state of more zechuyot, he has more merits. It's not talking about more merits, that's second. He's a more merit person. It's not that the person has more merits at 11:01 today. It's a person is a more merit person. It's not a person who at a given moment has more merits. It's a person who lives more merit life. That's what Rubai Zechuyas means. It is a lifestyle. This is a person who treasures good over evil, favors good over evil, but a person is a person. He stumbles sometimes. But b'derech klal, generally speaking, this is a solid, good person. No, a person is a person. But the Rebbeinu Shalom can say he's a tzaddik, even if at this moment he has more averos than mitzvahs, because the Rebbeinu Shalom is not looking at the moment of the person, he's looking at the person. Rubai Zechuyas Zuhi Mida B'nefesh. A Rubai Zechuyas is not a momentary look at the scale, it's a characteristic trait of a person. He's a tzaddik type person. His lifestyle is a tzaddik type person, and what he does on a given day may throw the scale off, but that doesn't change who he is. Hamida hazu yotzeres b'nefesh paletz hamatzav shel hachro letzad hatoiv b'tzuma shel nefesh. This lifestyle of favoring tzidkis and favoring morality and favoring ethics and favoring living a Torah lifestyle becomes a midah, becomes a characteristic trait of the person, and that is not undone because momentarily or for a day a person fell and couldn't control himself, and Nebuch did something he wouldn't want, he regrets doing. He didn't become a Rasha because now the scales are tipped for that amount of time. He did not become a Rasha. He doesn't lose his characteristic trait as far as the Rebbeinu Shalom is concerned. This is Rav Hutner's marshal. You can have a very patient person, the most patient sovereign you can imagine. He has unbelievable amount of patience. Smachza chamol, that a person grishes him and he loses his temper. So what happens? So what do we say about such a person? We say, oh, the person suffers from rage. We say the person suffers from rage. The person's characteristic didn't trade. We know this person is a very patient sovereign. But who knows what somebody did to him until he dreid a Moises Kishkis and he had to scream. The person never screams. He's such a tolerant, patient person. He screamed. So now we don't say, oh, that tremendous patient tzaddik, he became such a person filled with rage and anger. He needs therapy. That's for sure. We don't change his character. We say he's a sovereign. He's tremendously patient, but something happened and he lost it for a second. Mamish K'may Kain, Rav Hutner says, Efshaloi la'adam shinidasei midas rubeis achuyos lios nimtza b'matzav shel rubei averos. V'aval pi kein midasei shimidas rubeis achuyos einen nefgas al yedei kach. Vari yomedes b'takru gurasa. Same thing is true for a person. His character is that he's a tzaddik. He davens properly, he shoyim Shabbos, he puts on his tefillin, taras hamishpach, mezuzah. Everything is tzaddik. And not only that, he treasures and he values Torah mitzvahs, and he treasures and he values his relationship with the Rebbeinu Shalom, and he wants to be an Oved Hashem. All the check marks are in the right place. That's the person. That's the person. A person is defined by what he is, not what he does at a particular moment. So a person, the same way he can be a tremendously patient person and lose his temper, he's still a patient person. It's just an exception happened and he lost his he lost his temper at a given moment. A person can be mamish a tzaddik, even if for a particular moment the scales tip to the other side, or for a day, or for a week, whatever it is. In the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's still tzaddik, because that's who he is, not what he did at a particular moment. But the we understand again using that marshal, a person who is filled with rage, he's filled with rage. When he loses his temper, he loses his temper. Who knows what he can do during that moment of rage. On the other hand, you have a person who's a sovereign. He's a perfectly patient person, and he lost it for a minute. What he can do in that minute is no comparison to what the person who's filled with rage can do in a minute. And that's because the rage-filled person is a rage-filled person, and when he loses it, boy, does he lose it. And the sovereign is by nature a sovereign, and he lost it for a minute. They're two different people. So a person can be a tzaddik and lose it. He can lose it for a minute, for a day, for a week, whatever it is. And the Averis are more than the Zechuyas on the scale, quote unquote. But that doesn't change the fact that he's tzaddik. K'may kain. The Rav Hutner says, Yesh havdola ta'imis bein adam shu bei Zechuyas imidasai ela shel nimtza achshav b'mida hamistagli midasai achshav avaynoisa peinu bei shalois adam ubein adam shavaynoisa marub mischiyasa hein behetem lemidasai. Okay. The same thing Rav Hutner says is true. You have a person who historically is always tzaddik. And Nebuch, he was nirshel. And right now, if you just look at the moment, this moment, he has more averis than mitzvahs. Well, if I take a Russia, The Russia has also more Avera than mitzvahs. So I have two people here. I have a person who's lived a dedicated life to tzidkis, and right now, for whatever reason he did or didn't do something, he tipped the scale, and the scale now is the Avera scale. The Avera scale is more weighty. And then I have a person who's lived a whole life of rishis, and his scale of Avera is also weighty. So I have two people. A person who lived a life of tzidkis, he was nichshol, and now the Avera side is more weighty. And I have a person who lived his whole life Avera, and his Avera side is also weighty. Are these two people the same people? Because both of them at this moment in time, the Avera scale is heavier and more weighty than the mitzvah scale, chas v'sholom. We're not dealing with moments, we're dealing with life. This is a person whose life is dedicated, and he was nichshol. He doesn't lose his tzidkis. He is in overdraft protection. A person who lived his life in Avera, he has a definition. He lived his life in Avera. He's an Avera. B'kitzur, Afutna says, in summary, Rubai Zechuyas or Rubai Averas, when the Gemara talks about more sins or more mitzvahs, ain't like sikum shel pratim. We're not talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10, now 10 mitzvahs are greater than 9 averas. You did a big one now. You did a big lashon hara. Now there's 11 averas against 10 mitzvahs. This is the elementary school idea that we had, and the scales are going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and we don't know when they stop and how they stop. Forget that. Elamida benefesh. We're talking about a characteristic trait. A person has developed himself to be a tzaddik, and that's who he is. And the Rebbeinu Shalom recognizes him as that. And therefore, chas v'sholom is nefshon. Okay? A patient person lost his temper. It doesn't change who he is. He lost his temper. He's going to go back to who he was. He's going to go back to being a patient person. Okay. Mabed chodesh zeh. This new understanding of the Gemara, b'yodei lishlol tanasai shel morin Reb Itzel, will now negate the question of Reb Itzel. Reb Itzel Petterberger. Reb Itzel Toyin. Reb Itzel asked, Kim kivan shabeinini hu machza al machza, im kein haloi maspik loi lazos, lo haisef zechus achas alzu for yoisav lischos b'chasim atoiva shel yom kippur. According to the literal formulation of the Gemara, Reb Itzel says, the Gemara doesn't talk about Teshuva. The Gemara says 3 books. You have a Beinani, the scales are equally tipped. And what do you have to do now? The Gemara says, Zahu. You have to have merits. So if the merit side outweighs the Aveva side, you're inscribed for life on Yom Kippur. And the Rambam changed Zahu to doing Teshuva. Why did the Rambam say that the Beinani must do Teshuva? Why isn't it enough for a Beinani just to do a lot of mitzvahs and tip the scale? Because remember, now we're not talking about tipping scales. We got rid of that whole idea. We're not talking about 10 versus 9, 11 versus 10, 15 versus 5. We're not talking about that anymore because that doesn't make sense. Otherwise, a person's changing every second. We're talking now about who the person is. Now we understand how we can negate Reb Itzel's question on the Rambam. And through the Rambam, we now understand the Gemara. Sharei lefi mashin is vayir lanu ki rubai zechuyas mida benefesh v'rubai averis humida benefesh. We just explained, we got rid of the idea of 10 versus 9 and 11 versus 10, this scale, this side, more weighty, less weighty, and we came to a new conclusion that Rubai Zechuyas doesn't mean more merits, it means a person who is a more merit person. That's how he lives his life. Rubai Averis doesn't mean at a particular second he has more Averis, it means this is a person who lives the life of Rubai Averis. It's a Mida Benefesh. So now that's what a tzaddik is, and that's what a rosh is. So what's a Beinani? A Beinani is not a person who, this amazing person. Before we learned the Pachad Yitzchak, this Beinani was an amazing person. He went into Rosh Hashanah, and the scales were perfect. Exact Averis to exact mitzvahs. when you, of course, again, one mitzvah could be 1,000 averos, one avera can be 1,000 mitzvahs, but this person is amazing. He went into Rosh Hashanah and the scale is exact. It's exact. It's not tipped one way or the other. So we understand how difficult that concept is to understand that a person, and the vast, over-vast majority of the world, at least we hope that we're baiting him. We certainly don't want to be Rishoyim, and we don't want to, we're not in a position really to declare ourselves tzaddikim. So we have the Aseres Yemei Teshuva for baiting him, for us. So who is the Beinoni? So now that we understand there's a characteristic trait of tzaddik, there's nothing to do. It could be today, if you look at the scale, he has more averos than mitzvahs. But he's still a tzaddik because that's his character. His character is tzaddik. Person can have more mitzvahs than averos. He'll still be a Rasha because his characteristic trait is to be a Rasha. He happened to have done some mitzvahs, and now the scale is tipped to the Avera side, but it doesn't change who he is. He's still a person filled with rage, and he today may have shown that he can control his rage, and maybe he's doing tshuva, but he didn't change yet. A person who loses his temper, but actually is a great patient person, he doesn't lose his status as a patient person because he blew his temper one time. So we understand now we're talking about who the person is. So our foot is now going to say the Chiddush. The same way tzaddik is a character, person is dedicated to tzidkis, irrespective of where the scale is right now. Rasha is a person who dedicated his life to evil, irrespective of where his scale is. A Beinoni is a person, he's in the middle. He hasn't dedicated his life to anything. Nishtahin, nishtaher. He's in the middle. It doesn't mean his scales are amazingly like this. Such a person, unbelievably, went into Rosh Hashanah. It's perfect. Nothing to do with perfect scales. The same way tzaddik is a character trait. He is dedicated to the life of tzidkis, even if at this moment there are more averos on his scale. And the Rasha is someone who's dedicated to evil, even if right now he has more mitzvahs. It's a lifestyle. It's a dedication to something. A Beinoni is also a lifestyle. I'm in the middle. I can hear both sides of everything. I hear it. And therefore, there's no dedication whatsoever to anything. A person's in the middle. He's in the middle on every issue. Kamoi came, my footnote says, this idea of a Beinoni in the middle is also a characteristic trait. A tzaddik is a character trait. A rosh is a character trait. Doesn't have anything to do with numerical amounts. A Beinoni is also a characteristic trait. I'm in the middle. I hear everything. Kolaima. Ha'odem hazeh mesyachasu el harav el hatoiv. This is a person who can be mityaches. He can identify a little with evil. He can identify with good. He doesn't identify strongly with anything. He doesn't want to strongly identify with anything. Because this way he can go to every party. This party he can go to because he's welcome there, because he hasn't spoken his mind. And he can go to the other party because he's welcome everywhere, because this is what we call the middle of the road. He is accepted at every party. He goes to every Geshmaka party because nobody knows what his positions are. Nobody knows what he believes in. He's accepting of everything. Everything's Geshmak. So this is a person that simply doesn't identify with anything. He's a Beinoni. He's in the middle. In Nishta Tzaddik, Nishta Rasha. Why? Because he's not dedicated and doesn't, Rafutna says, his dahut. He doesn't identify with anything. V'amida hazu tamid be'eno v'tokva afilu mitoisloi kama zechuyos. V'afilu im yosef zechuyos hachi yitzrabu kvi kama ala choyves aidai midosi mida beinonis. V'chol zaman shemidosi nevchenes hi b'mifram ha-beinonius ein kan mokum l'chasim l'toiva. You have this Beinoni now. The tzaddik is characteristically a tzaddik. He's characteristically an Oved Hashem. The fact that right now he has more Averis than mitzvahs doesn't mean anything to the Rebbeinu Shalom. He's an overdraft protection because that's who he is and that's his life. And he's gonna come back into a positive balance. The Rasha, that's how he lives his life. It happens to be that right now he has more mitzvahs than Averis. He's still a Rasha because that's his lifestyle. The Beinani, he's a person that doesn't identify with anything. He can see it this way, he can see it that way. What's the problem here? So Rav Hutner now explains. If that's what a Beinani means in the Gemara, and the Rambam understood this, because the Rambam wasn't willing to go with the pshat, oh, he's a tzaddik, no, he's a Rasha, oh, he's a tzaddik. The Rambam wasn't willing to go with this every second you change, depending upon what you're doing. So the Rambam left that pshat in the Gemara. And the Rambam adopted the pshat in the Gemara that the Gemara is talking about, not how many zechuyos the person has, but is the person a zechuyot person? It's not how many averos the person has, but is this a person, an avera person? Given that, a Beinani is not a person who has equal scales. He's a Beinani person. It's a person who has no identification, and he's not willing to dedicate himself to one side or to the other. Now, what happens to such a person? So, Aseres Yemei Teshuva, he's a Beinani. He's a person who can see everything both ways, either way, up and down, right and left, and he doesn't want to put his foot down on either side of the fence. So what happens to such a person? He does 1,000,000 mitzvahs during Aseres Yemei Teshuva, and he doesn't do any averos during Aseres Yemei Teshuva. Okay, so he tipped the scales. But he didn't do tshuva. We don't care how many more mitzvahs he has than averos. We've left that pshat. What we're looking for this person to do, this Beinani, is to do tshuva from being a Beinani. A Beinani is a problem. A Beinani doesn't have to do a couple of more mitzvahs to tip the scale, according to the Rambam. The Beinani has to do tshuva from being a Beinani. For heaven's sake, identify who you are. We mentioned the Kotzker Rebbe said that the din on Rosh Hashanah is that oiske mishpat varies. On Rosh Hashanah, the Rebbeinu Shalom is going to ask him who you are. Of course, a person did this, that person didn't do this, and he did this good thing, he did this bad thing, all these little pratim. But the real din is, who are you? Identify yourself. What are you? Is your life about avodas Hashem? And sometimes a person does something he shouldn't do. Or is your life not avodas Hashem, and it's machzechamol that you do a mitzvah? Who are you? What side of the line do you fall on? A Beinani is someone who has to do tshuva, not to add a couple of more mitzvahs to his scale, because he still didn't change who he is. Unless the mitzvahs changes who he is, and he's now dedicating his life to the mitzvah side, just doing a couple of more mitzvahs is doing, but he didn't change who he is. And he remains a Beinani. So Rav Hutner says, until the person does tshuva from being the Beinani, you have to stop being a Beinani. You can be a Beinani and do a lot of mitzvahs and ma'asim toivim Aseres Yemei Teshuva. You remain a Beinani, because a Beinani is a type of lifestyle. The tzaddik is a lifestyle. The Rosh is a lifestyle. It has nothing to do with numeric values on the scale. A Beinani is a lifestyle. I'm in the middle. I can see everything both ways. You have to do tshuva from being a Beinani. Not you have to do more mitzvahs. You have to do tshuva. Beinani needs tshuva. So Rav Hutner says, "V'chol zaman shemidosei nefchenes hi b'mivchan habeinonis." So long as the person is tested in the Beinanis, he's a Beinani. Yom Kippur comes, and he did so many mitzvahs, and the Rebbeinu Shalom still sees that the guy is that the person is a Beinani, a blight a Beinani. The Rebbeinu Shalom takes that super microscope and looks into the person and says he did tremendous amount of mitzvahs for the Aseres Yemei Teshuva. I still don't see a dedication in this person. I still don't see that he's putting his foot down on one side of the fence. He remains a Beinani, and ein kan mokum lechasim l'toiva. Such a person still can't get a chasim l'toiva never. So now we have a new understanding of the Gemara. A tzaddik means that the Rebbeinu Shalom understands the wholeness of the person, the whole life of the person, the whole narrative of the person, everything about the person. This person is on the right side of the fence. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, okay, for a given period of time, he's an overdraft, we'll provide him overdraft protection, we'll give him a gemach simateva. The person that's a Rosh, the Rebbeinu Shalom looks at his whole life and says, the person dedicated people. Whenever something comes up, he's always on the wrong side of the fence. For whatever reason, he gave a lot of money here, he gave a lot of money there, he did this, he did that, but there's no change there. He's still on the wrong side of the fence. Even if he has more mitzvahs than Averis, he's still a Rosh. The Beinani needs to do tshuva not by adding zuchuyot. He needs to do tshuva from being a Beinani. So now we understand. The Rambam didn't just copy the Gemara and say the Beinani has to have zuchuyot. The Gemara says that the Beinani, zachu, if he merits, he will have a chesima teva. And if he doesn't merit, la'aleinu something else. The Rambam interpreted the Gemara that zachu doesn't mean just add a couple of mitzvahs. Zachu means do tshuva from being a Beinani. Zachu, if you merit a chesima teva, you'll get a chesima teva. How do you merit getting a chesima teva? By stop being a Beinani. So our footnote finishes off. That's why the Rambam interpreted the Gemara that we're not talking about the elementary school idea of tzaddik has a couple of more, Rasha has a couple of more, the Beinani is perfect in the middle, and people can go back and forth and back and forth and back. We're completely illogical. The Rambam understood the Gemara to talk about characteristic traits. That's a tzaddik. A characteristic trait, that could be a Rasha. And a Beinani is also a characteristic trait. And what does the Beinani need to do during Aseres Yemei Teshuva? Stop being a Beinani. So the Rambam learned Zachu means Asu Teshuva. The Beinani has to do Teshuva, not from a little Lashon Hara, not give a little more stuff. The Beinani has to do Teshuva to stop being a Beinani. The Teshuva is to be masakin, to fix being a Beinani, for heaven's sake. Put your foot down on the right side of the fence already. And we should all be inscribed in the book of life. We have such an example. We learn about it in elementary school. We don't get the whole story. We know the first part of the story, the famous part. Avram Avinu at the Kivshan HaEsh. Nimrod said to Avram Avinu, Avram, listen, you broke all the avodah zaros here, you broke the avodah zaros in your father's shop, we're throwing you into this fire. Avram Avinu said, Gesundheit hate, I'm not giving up my belief in the one God who created the world, Gesundheit hate. So they threw him into this, but before they threw him into the fire, they asked Avram's brother, Haran. Avram had two brothers, Haran and Nachor. Avram's brother Haran is the father of Lot. Avram Avinu's brother Haran is also the father of Yiscah, who was Sarah. Sarah and Lot were brothers and sisters. So Avram married Haran's daughter Yiscah. Avram married Sarah. That was his niece. Avram was the uncle of Sarah. Avram was the uncle of Lot. Okay. So Avram has a brother Haran. Before they throw Avram into the Kivshan HaEsh, Nimrod asks Haran, who are you with? Are you with our God? Are you with your brother Avram's God? So Haran said, let's wait and see what happens. If Avram comes out alive from the fire, I'm with him. If Avram gets burned up in the fire, I'm with you, Nimrod. They threw Avram Avinu into the fire, and Avram Avinu walks out of the fire. The nest of the Kivshan HaEsh. They then took Haran, the first part of the story we all know. They then took Haran, the Medrash says, and they threw him into the fire, and he got burnt in the fire. He died. Now, why did he die in the fire? Avram Avinu was saved, because Avram Avinu went into the fire with his foot on the right side of the fence. He was dedicated to the Rebbeinu Shalom. He kept his foot on the right side of the fence. He went into the Kivshin Eish, the Rebbeinu Shalom saved him. The Rebbeinu Shalom gave Avram Avinu Gamach Simatayv. Haran said, I'm straddling the fence. I'm going to keep my foot, I'm going to keep my options open. I'm on both sides of the fence. If Avram comes out, I'm with him. If Avram doesn't come out, I'm with you. They threw him into the fire, and there was no Gamach Simatayv there, because he never, ever stopped being a Beinani. You can't be on both sides of the fence. We say, Rosh Hashanah, we say, I'm going to say in Kippur, part of the Shemoneh Esrei that we were learning before Rosh Hashanah, we were learning it with the Ramchal. In the Shemoneh Esrei, we have the Uvachains. And in the V'chein Ten Kovod Hashem La'amecha, Rebbeinu Shalom gives, after the phases that we spoke about with the Ramchal, we say, Rebbeinu Shalom, now give honor and dignity to your nation. Tehila Reyecha, praise to those who fear you. V'sikra Tova l'darshecha, and good hope for the future, for those who search for you. U'pischoin peh la'miyachalim loch, and the ability to open the mouth of those who actually look forward to you. And I'm reading now from just the Hebrew transliteration of U'pischoin peh la'miyachalim loch. Rebbeinu Shalom, pischoin peh, Pesach, please open our mouths, la'miyachalim loch, to those who seek you, to those who hope in you. Simcha li'atzecha, v'sasan li'irecha, joy to Eretz Yisrael, happiness to Eretz Yisrael, joy to Yerushalayim. Utzmichas keren l'davradecha, Mashiach nech avichas nele ben ish mishrebim hepimein. What's the flow here? Pischain pelam yachalim loch. Let the Rebbeinu Shalom give those people who are hoping in you for simcha li'atzecha, sasan li'recha, tzmichas keren l'davradecha, avichas nele ben ish mishrebim hepimein. Rebbeinu Shalom, those people who are looking so forward that Eretz Yisrael should be happy and Yerushalayim should rejoice and Mashiach should come and have Yemei. Give them the courage to open their mouths and speak out. My Hebrew transliteration says, Ve'elu hamitzapim lishuasecha. Those Rebbeinu Shalom, those who look so forward to the Yeshua already. Ten lahem ha'oimetz l'daber b'fnei kol. Give them the courage and the power to be able to and be willing to open their mouths in front of everyone and speak their minds. And this is a prayer on Rosh Hashanah. Pischain pelam yachlam loch. Rebbeinu Shalom, give people the courage. Those people who have learned in Yonim that we learned, Masechta Midas, Masechta Tamid, Mekhasim, Masechta Shkolim. We're looking forward. We talk about Bias Mashiach. We're learning Das Tavunas. We're learning about these inyanim about Bias Mashiach. We learned about the Chashivas of Aliyah Eretz Yisrael and the Chashivas of living in Eretz Yisrael. Simcha li'atzecha v'sasan li'recha. Rebbeinu Shalom, give these people, give us the strength to have the courage to speak out in public about these things and not to be shy about it, not to be ashamed about it, and not to be worried about what other people will think about us if we speak about these things. Pischain pelam yachlam loch. We pray on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Rebbeinu Shalom, help us, give us the courage to open our mouths, even if we become somewhat unpopular to certain people. Rebbeinu Shalom, we should all have the courage to open our mouths already and be able to say, it's time for simcha li'atzecha, sasan li'recha, tzmichas keren l'davradecha, v'richas nele ben yishem mishichecha, b'mheira v'yameinu. Put your foot on the right side of the fence and speak out and stop being a Beinani. Do Teshuva from being a Beinani. You may not be invited to all the parties you used to be invited to. This is a thing. But I did Teshuva from being a Beinani. There's a Mishnah in Edyus that says, it's a Shita that's brought down in Masechta Edyus, and the Tana who said the Shita held a certain way. At any rate, they were putting pressure on the Tana to retract his position. And he said, I'm not retracting my position. Mutav she'ekra shoyta kol yomai lo esa rosha sha'achas l'nei moken. I'm willing that people should call me insane my whole life rather than 1 second being a Russia in the eyes of God. Person understands something, believes it's MS, pischain pelam yachlim loch. Get rid of the Beinonius. This is who I am. This is what I represent. This is what I talk about. This is what's important to me. I have sources in the Torah to demonstrate it, etc., etc. Kol echad ve'echad, every single person, speak out. It's time in the tefillah, simcha le'atzecha, sasan li'recha, tzmichas ken l'dov avdecha, vichas nela ben yishem yishichecha, b'mheira v'yameinu, not next year, not in 2 years, not in 3 years, not in 10 years, not in 15 years, not when when all the ducks are in the place, and not when it's convenient for me. Ten pischaim pelam yachalim loch. Now is the time for people to do tshuva from being a Beinoni. Because if you don't do tshuva from being a Beinoni, and you do all these mitzvahs, and you do all these mitzvahs, my footnote clearly wrote, no, it's not a chasima type. The chasima type for us as Beinonim is to get off the fence and stop being harans and being willing to go into the fire like Avraham Avinu without any preconditions. I'm going into the fire. I'm going into the Yam Suf like Nachshon ben Aminadav. I don't want any guarantees. I don't want anything from the Rebbeinu Shalom to tell me, yes, you are guaranteed that I am doing what is correct and proper without any preconditions. I'm getting off the fence. I'm becoming an Avraham Avinu. I'm ready to jump into the fire. I'm ready to jump into the water, Nachshon ben Aminadav. I don't want to be a Horan who sits on the fence and waits to what the outcome is. Pischaim pelam yachlam. The Rebbeinu Shalom should give us the kaiches to be able to speak out and say what's emes. And then people say, well, how can you speak what's emes? How can anybody speak what's emes? There's no such thing as objective truth, and everything is subjective, and everybody has different cheetahs, and everybody has different narratives, and I'll put the mices. But we all know deep down, we've talked about this for months, that there are certain basic truths that we all agree to, but there are people that have excuses and justifications for all kinds of things. This is the time. The Aseres Yemei Teshuva is the time to stop the justifications and to stop the excuses and pischain pelam yachlim lach, to be able to speak out without any fear about the truth, what's right and what's wrong according to the Torah. Now, that doesn't mean there's no machlekes. Doesn't mean that there are no two shitas. There are two shitas. There can be two shitas, and Shulchan Aruch there are two shitas. But pischain pelam yachlim lach, we don't have to be shy and ashamed of our shita because we're worried about what someone else will say about it. And they should stop talking about us. We should stop talking about them. We talked about it in the Ramchal. One of the most important things preparing for Shani and Kippur Aseres Yemei Teshuva is we come together so that the aura of Hashem can strengthen Klal Yisrael, so that we can transmit the aura to the Goyim nations of the world, and then it will be V'chein tein kod Hashem lamecha. Sh'ol v'zaycha to Gemach Simetayva. All those Yidden in the Yeshua Shav Yeshuas, all Yidden in the Refuah Shav Refuas, all Yidden in the Chamas Shav Nechamas, all Yidden in the Bracha Shav Brachas, all those Yidden that need Kaiches for Pischain Pelam Yachlim Lach, Rebbeinu Shalom, give those Yidden Pischain Pelam Yachlim Lach for Simcha Le'atzecha and Sasan Li'recha and Tzmichas Ken L'Dov Avdecha and Amichas Nela V'Nisha Mishechecha, that it should be B'mheira V'yameinu, mamish now, whether it's convenient or inconvenient for us. It should be mamish now. Everybody, please take care of yourselves. We do what we need to do. We stay away from what we don't need to do. We listen to the Horaot. They're confusing. They're yes confusing. They're not confusing. We make our hishtadlus because there's a mitzvah called Nishmar Demoed Nafshei Seichen. Somebody told me yesterday, I was talking to a Rav. The Rav said to me yesterday that he saw in a sefer that one of the outstanding signs of Yira Shamayim is a person that's makbid on Nishmat Demoed Nafshei Seichen. I forgot to ask him what sefer he saw it in. He said one of the outstanding examples in a person's life of being a Yorei Shamayim, but being a God-fearing person, is being Mekayim the mitzvah Mishmat Moed Nafshe Seichem. Name, we don't know really what's going on out there, and this, who knows what's going on out there, what the real truth is. But we make our hishtadlus. We do things based upon what the Seichel Yosha tells us to do. It's certainly not a Seichel Yosha with what's going on out there to go to a wedding where there are 300 people. It's not a Seichel Yosha to go to a wedding where there's 100 people. It's not a Seichel Yosha to go to a place where 100 people or 50 people are talking on top of each other and no one's making mass. Well, there's Seichel Yoshas here. There's certain Seichel Yoshas that we know are Seichel Yoshas. Do the Seichel Yosha. Take care of yourself. We have to make our hishtadlus to be healthy, that the Rebbeinu Shalom can come and keep us healthy. If we stam, let's say, and we don't do our hishtadlus, then we're just being soymech on a nest. And how many times did we learn Masechta Midas and Masechta Tamid that we're not allowed to rely on a nest? So everybody have a wonderful day. We're working on our status of Beinonim. According to Rambam, the way our Footnote explains, I'm working on a status of Beinonim through Yom Kippur to get rid of that Beinonis, to get rid of that middle of the road. I can hear everything both ways, and there are times we learn Gemara, Abaye and Rav. I can hear Abaye and I can hear Rav. I can hear both ways. We all know what I'm talking about. There are things that you shouldn't be able to hear both ways. There are things that are just right and wrong. The Baruch Shalom should give us the kaiches, the Pisraim Pelam Yachmalach. We should have the courage to leave that status of Beinonim and come to the status of Tzaddikim Gemurim, or Gemach Sinatayva. Let's